Chris Stover from the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs. Many of you may already know about CCEPA, but I see a couple of new faces in here tonight. CCEPA is a joint venture of St. Mary's University and the Atlantic School of Theology. We have a mandate to provide an arena for critical thinking, and here we are tonight in that kind of arena, thanks to Dr. Mark Mercer in the philosophy department here at St. Mary's University, who approached CCEPA in the hopes of having a conversation, a public conversation about religious celebration in secular settings, specifically at this time of year. So in a moment, CCEPA's program committee chair, Kevin Kindred, will introduce our panel of speakers tonight on this topic. But before I do that, I want to welcome our live stream audience and encourage you as well to participate in the question and answer period that's going to follow this formal discussion. And I'd also like you to use the evaluation feature on that screen so you can tell us what you think of tonight's event. For those of you here in the room, there are copies of that evaluation in front of you. I'd really appreciate it if you could fill that out before we move upstairs to the fourth floor for a reception afterward, where we can have a continuing conversation that will begin now. Kevin?
Thank you, Chris. So welcome to our audience in the room and to our live streaming audience, and thank you to Chris for arranging an event. It promises to be timely and interesting. 'Tis the season. Something changes in the air in December, and whether it's because we're making plans for time off with family, or planning our religious observances, or simply that we're immersed in seasonal decorations and advertisements and music, the holiday season is sort of inescapable. You may recall that this year Shoppers Drug Mart started playing its Christmas music earlier than ever on November 1st until customers complained that it was way too early. So, if it's true that there's a war on Christmas, you'd forgive the casual observer for drawing the conclusion that Christmas is indeed winning. But if you watch Fox News, or to be more Canadian about it, Sun News, although based on the data, it's probably statistically impossible that any of you actually watch Sun News. But if you do, you'll hear a little bit about a war on Christmas. And although that term is probably just a branding exercise in order to get more media attention, it does speak to a real tension that we encounter annually this time of year. So some examples, some dispatches, if you will, from the front of the war on Christmas. A few years back in Ontario, Judge Marion Cohen ordered that a Christmas tree be removed from her courtroom, as the Christian symbol sent a message to non-Christians that they weren't part of the institution. That was her direction. The decision was criticized by politicians, by Christian leaders, and also by Jewish and Muslim and secular groups as well. This very institution, St. Mary's University, is a public university. It does have a close relationship with the Catholic Church, but it isn't a religious institution per se. And it does annually erect a nativity scene, which is quite explicitly an expression of a Christian narrative, despite a general policy against public displays that aren't requested by student groups. As a final example, there's a viral video going around right now from Chester County, Pennsylvania, where civic officials annually display on public land a Christmas tree and a menorah each holiday season, and a group calling themselves the Evangelical Pastafarians have petitioned the county to be allowed to display symbols of their religion. In this case, a pine tree with pasta decorations, topped with an image of their deity, the flying spaghetti monster. So whether serious or mocking, this group is asking for an explanation why Christian and Jewish symbols are displayed to the exclusion of others. So, silly, serious, or somewhere in between, stories like this ask some pretty fundamental questions, like why and how do secular governments recognize the traditional significance of this season when that significance has religious roots? How do supposedly inclusive institutions make a space for some kinds of religious holidays to be recognized without offending or alienating those with different religious backgrounds? And where in all of this are the rights of non-believers, or the right that we all have to be free from religion if we choose? So to help us with these and other thorny questions, CCEPA has assembled a panel of experts from a variety of backgrounds who are going to share their perspectives with us. And I'll ask each of them to start with an 8-minute opening statement setting out their perspective. Then we're going to have a round 2, and I'll give each of them 4 or 5 minutes to respond to the opening statements made by others. And then our program gets turned over to you. I'll ask you to come to the microphone, and please note the microphone is in this aisle here. So if you're on this side of the room, you'll have to navigate through the front or through the back in order to get to the microphone. I'll encourage you to do so because, again, we're here for you and to make sure that you can participate in this dialogue. My job as moderator is to ask you to express your passion on this topic in a respectful and constructive way, and to assist you in keeping your questions brief and to the point. That's a polite way of saying that I will cut you off in order to keep the evening progressing smoothly. And my last task before turning it over to opening statements is to introduce you to each of the panelists. So we will start at the far end here. Kevin Cox has been a journalist for 37 years with the Ottawa Citizen, the Hamilton Spectator, and the Globe and Mail. He currently writes columns for allnovascotia.com, including one on spirituality and ethics, and he is in his 4th year of ministry training with United Church of Canada. Seated next to him, Wendell Eisener is a Lutheran pastor and since 2003 has been a part-time or sessional faculty member with the Department of Religious Studies at St. Mary's and the Atlantic School of Theology. He's taught everything from Introduction to Eastern Religions to advanced courses on the Old Testament. Seated next to him, Rabbi David Ellis is the regional chaplain for the Atlantic Jewish Council. In addition to providing spiritual leadership for Jewish communities throughout the region, Rabbi Ellis often speaks publicly about current affairs and Jewish history and culture. And finally, closest to me, Mark Mercer is an associate professor and the chair of the philosophy department here at St. Mary's University. In addition to his academic interests, he often writes for the press as an advocate for freedom of expression, atheism, and secularism, including advocating taking Christ out of Christmas and advocating against lying to children about Santa Claus. Mark, I'm not sure what is the lie that you're talking about, but I'm sure you'll fill me in at the reception afterwards. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our panel for opening statements, and I'll ask them to proceed in the order in which I introduced them. So we'll start with Kevin Cox.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I must say I'm going to leave the theological questions to Rabbi Ellis and Dr. Eisener here, who are superior to me in every way in that sense. I had my whole thing prepared tonight about what a wonderful scene that the Nativity is and how it's interfaith and all the rest of it. And then I received an email after appearing on CBC that said somebody in the United Church had already done that. So I looked it up, and sure enough, he had. But we'll start anyways. The nativity scene that you see in front of you, and I brought mine from home, was introduced in 1224 AD by St. Francis of Assisi, who felt that his church wasn't big enough to accommodate a Christmas Eve service. Now, it'd be a wonderful problem to have, that your church can't accommodate everybody in Christmas Eve. But it couldn't, so they put the nativity scene in a cave with all the animals around it and created what I think, and the reason I think it ought to be displayed for the public to see, is the closest thing to paradise as you could conceive of. You've got the poor, the shepherds, the wise men, arm to arm. You've got the animals with the humans. And they're all focused on the baby. And this is as interfaith, I think, as it can get. People travel from all over. They travel to the stable. They travel from the Orient. They travel from the fields. And my view, as far as displaying this in the public area, I understand the whole issue of that there are groups that object to the Christians taking control. Well, to be honest about it, we had control for about 800 years. We were in a privileged position. I freely admit that Christianity abused that position and enforced its views on the world. However, I live in a little town called Lockport. I took a walk around last Saturday night. There were 19 Santa displays and 2 nativities. We were losing 19-2. In my neighborhood, however, I noticed there were 4 nativities, and there's an Anglican one, there's a Baptist one, a Roman Catholic one, and the United Church one is right in the middle. So that would be our position. But my whole point is that this is a beautiful scene, regardless of how you take it theologically. And you can take it or you can leave it. But to me, this symbolizes peace on earth. This is as good as society could get. This is what the kingdom of God looks like, regardless of what your view of God is. This is what the kingdom looks like, as simply as we can make it. And again, as I look at all the crass commercialism that surrounds Christmas, I find myself constantly brought back to the manger, no matter where it is. And I do find that people actually stop, even outside my light-up one in Lockport, and have a look. And I'm wondering if we're living in a society that has forgotten how to look. And just to conclude, I think it comes back to that Christmas carol. Do you see what I see? And I think in the interfaith tradition, do I see what you see? Because therein lies that peace that we can find from that scene. And I'll turn it over to Wendell.
I'm afraid I'm going to sound like the grumpy old man now. Originally, this was billed as a discussion regarding the propriety of St. Mary's University, a secular public institution, despite its misleadingly religious-sounding name, displaying a nativity scene. And originally, I thought this would be a rather simple matter. If the university was going to make a public display of a religious symbol, but the symbol had to be so divorced from its context and so divested of its content that it really no longer meant anything, at least officially, then it was my opinion that that was a very bad idea and would probably be best not to make such a public display. But now the discussion seems to be considerably wider. What's the propriety of displaying any religious symbols in a secular setting? When the Christian church emerged from hiding in the 4th century of the Common Era and began to spread unimpeded by its former status of religio illicita throughout the ancient world, it both incorporated and reinterpreted many of the symbols and rituals it encountered in pagan lands. Now, whether this was a godly attempt to baptize paganism or simply an exercise in cultural imperialism, well, we'll leave that for a discussion for another night. But many of these pre-existing symbols and rituals were used to illustrate to the recent converts the meaning and the nature of the two great principal Christian feasts. The Feast of the Nativity, what Christians better known as Christmas, and the Resurrection of the Lord, better known as Easter. The idea was that the Christian dispensation was understood as the end of the earlier religions. Not the end in the sense that I had a cookie and I ate it, now it's gone, it's come to an end. But the end in the sense in which when one builds a house and you come to the end of the construction, it's finally there and complete and finished for the first time. The Christ event in the early church was understood to be the end of all religion, and therefore universally applicable and, in a sense, universally approachable by all peoples and all cultures. Now, in theology, we make distinctions between what's essential to the faith, or essa, and what's not. We call that adiaphora, let alone what's contrary to the faith. Many of the pagan accretions to the Feast of the Nativity are certainly not essential to the proclamation of the gospel. It is entirely possible to observe Christmas without a Christmas tree, without eggnog or wassail, without gifts and wreaths, without tinsel and lights, holly and ivy, and even without a nativity scene. They are all utterly adiaphoral. They are not of the essa. Take them or leave them. But it is not possible to celebrate Christmas, that is the Christ Mass, without the Nativity. That is the essa of the feast. Back in the 17th century, the Puritans tried to outlaw Christmas as vestiges of pagan superstitious nonsense. Didn't really work out. Maybe we should simply celebrate some cross-cultural multi-faith winterval as was tried in Britain not so long ago, again with less than thundering success. The stark fact is this: Christmas is no longer just a Christian feast today. In fact, in its present form, it's scarcely recognizable as a Christian holiday, or should I say holy day, at all. So if the world wants to remove Christ from the secular observances of Christmas, let it do so. Give him back to the Christians to honor as they choose. But this would be no time for half-hearted measures. Christians can also give back what they took as well. And so we will give back to the Druids their sacred fir and pine. Just don't call them Christmas trees anymore. And we'll give back to the ancient Romans, if there be any to be found, their gift-giving and caroling. But call it the Saturnalia that it really is. And we'll return to the old Norse tribes their winter sky-wandering god Odin. But he's not Santa Claus, much less St. Nicholas, whose feast day it is today, incidentally. And sun-worshipping pagans of all stripes, both imperial and domestic, can have back December 25th as the old feast day of the Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Just don't think you're observing the Christian holiday of Nativity of the Lord. And while we're at it, we'll give back the Yule logs, the holly and the ivy, the wreaths and the garlands, even the wassail bowl. Never did like this stuff. None of them are essential. All of them are originally pagan. The secular Christmas may be very well about the giving and receiving of gifts. The Christian observance is about a gift. The secular Christmas, or maybe we should call it Xmas, where X stands for the unknown substance, says that it's about children. The Christian feast is about a child. And there's nothing wrong with a secular holiday that wishes for peace on earth. It's simply not the same as the peace which passes all understanding. However you choose to celebrate it, honor the season in its integrity. If it's the Christian observance of the birth of Jesus Christ, well and good. But if Saturnalia is your thing, that's fine too. Just call it as much. Rabbi.
Thank you. They always say the Jews are the cause of all the trouble. And I guess I'm going to have to admit to it in this case. We are, at least to some extent. We're responsible for some of the Christmas schmaltz that comes around, because not just Irving Berlin, but if you do a Google search for Christmas songs by Jews, I believe Harry Simeon with the little drummer boy, I think there's at least a dozen familiar Christmas songs that were written by Jews for that. My good friend Erwin Mendelsohn said that his father was very much out in Cape Breton in the old days, not in the Christmas spirit, but in the commercial spirit when this time came around, because the Jewish merchants, if they hit it during this time, they had a living. If not, they didn't during the rest of the year for that. So what do we do with things like that? My friend David Addis up in Moncton used to know a man who lived in northern New Brunswick, up in Forest Land up there. He said, hey, don't knock this Jesus guy. If it wasn't for his birthday, I wouldn't be selling all these Christmas trees down to the States. So I guess we're the cause of all this. So what do we do about this? I just throw that out. A couple of instances, examples without commentary. I'll just throw them out, do what you want to with them. We'll go back to them, discuss them, or I'll clarify if you want me, but I'm just throw them out for you. Examples. A few years ago, a good friend of mine, a member of our community, Mrs. Myra Freeman, was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. The tradition in the house there was to have some kind of Christmas thing going on. Obviously, Myra Freeman was not going to do a Christmas thing exactly, but she wasn't going to force everybody to do Hanukkah either. So what was she supposed to do there as a public figure and having to recognize certain things and keep faithful to her own tradition? Throw it out. This Monday night, down at Grand Parade, the Lubavitch Hasidim, who live just a few blocks away from here, the international Jewish group, are going to light a menorah publicly. It is at their expense. But it's in the public sphere there. Should we be doing that or not? It's right next to the Christmas tree. They've got one there. Should we have one also? We'll talk about that. In Germany, I just saw something on Deutsche Welle's website. Now, there's a whole thing that Deutsche Welle is pointing about German Jewish culture. The German government has spent millions of euros to build synagogues in places where they don't even have people there anymore for that. So there's the government right involved with the religion directly doing things. What about that? A few months ago, I was in Cape Breton at the time, but I was called by something. It barely made the news. We kind of kept it off, but it was something that happened over on North Street. There were some Hindus living over there, and they had something on one of their doors that looked like a swastika. It's the symbol, the cross there with the crooked lines on it for that. It was on the door over there, and I think somebody from my community saw it, and they were rather upset about this. They didn't know what it was some kind of desecration or something like this. It turns out, with a little bit of education, we found out that this is not a swastika. First of all, it was parallel. It was not diagonal. The Nazi swastika, evil symbol, was always diagonal. And it has been around long before the Nazi swastika. It has been around for thousands of years, apparently. In the Hindu tradition, it represents certain things for this. Should these people take these off their doors now, do that, because it might offend or might mislead certain people and that? Leave that to you also. One more. A few years ago, the little, city or village, whatever, of Oxford up the road on the 102, decided that they were not going to have a happy holiday season this year. They were going to have a Merry Christmas this year. And my organization, the Atlantic Jewish Council, had something to say about that decision. I don't think there are any Jews in Oxford, to my knowledge, but it doesn't make any difference. So we had something to say about that, what we have then. Where do we go with this? I'd like to see sort of an open display for things for all religions. I believe let's just face the facts. A majority culture is going to have dominance over things in a country. If you go to Israel, they're going to observe Saturday as the day of rest, not Sunday. Sunday's a work day in Israel. If a dedicated Christian wants to observe Sunday, they're just going to have to adjust things and their schedule for that, or they're going to have to switch their holy day to Saturday, as a lot of Christians do over there. If you go to a Muslim country, in some Muslim countries there is very little freedom of religion at all. Certainly for Jewish people, can't even enter certain Muslim countries. But whatever we have there, things are going to be by the dominant specter of what they are for that. What I would hope is that dominant religion does not rule it over people with an iron hand and exclude other peoples who are within the societies there, and do the things we've recognized over the last number of years of respecting minority rights, small views, and people like that they not be overwhelmed by that. On the other hand, it's up to the minority culture itself to protect itself. It's up to defend itself. It's to defend their own things. They say, okay, we're going to hear a bunch of Christmas songs. There's no way of escaping it, but let's get our Hanukkah tradition to better. Better yet, we've got a lot of holidays that are even more important than Hanukkah, contrary to popular opinion. Let's go and see what the Sukkot holiday is about. It's a marvelous holiday a few months ago, and we'll know what it is about at all. We've got some marvelous, marvelous holidays. So it's up to us within our smaller religious groups to get to our own traditions, do that there. And I don't necessarily want the government or the public arena to balance that out. That's up for us to do, to get together in our own ways to do for that. When we get all kinds of public displays of things, I think we make a distinction between displays of religion and displays of religious kitsch. Because a lot of what we see in public ground is religious kitsch. It's not a true representation of what it's about. You'll find people who genuinely believe in the churches, that this is not what the story of it is about at all. Wendell was on the way to that, talked about the essential parts of it for that. I think we need a little bit more education in the public about this. I don't think the Canadian media is as good as some other countries are. If you think of NPR in the United States, if you look at the BBC's website, there's a whole on their website, dozens of religions there, information about it, contacts, links to everything for that. I don't think there is such a thing in Canada for that. It's not covered nearly as well on the CBC as that. Just some odd things here. There for that. The print media also does not cover it as well as it should. We've got a media person here. We'll pass it on to your people down there and tell them about that. But it should be much better. And That's why I'm so happy with this group here. Most of all, I think what we need, the worst place you can go nowadays if you want to learn about religion, if you want to learn about the Bible and that, is to go to a synagogue or a church or probably a mosque or a temple of any sort. You won't find real knowledge of religion there. You take any person in a church row when they're reading the lectionary, you ask them, what's this about? And they're not going to be able to tell you what it's about. People in our synagogues, if they're reading the Torah reading, the Haftarah reading, what does the prophet talk about? They can't tell you beans what it's about. Our synagogues and churches have failed to get a knowledge, a critical assessment of what religion is about for our days and time to deal with our texts as living documents. That's why I'm so happy with this organization. I guess the nudge has to come from the university, the critical community to do that. And we should be able to look at this. We have to bring this into light. And this, but I'm so glad to see this group here. I hope we'll see many, many more groups like this. That's what I threw out for now. We'll grab some other things later, perhaps.
Thanks. Religion is a horrid thing, not just the institutions of organized religion. They certainly are horrid, but I mean as well religious beliefs, attitudes, and practices. There are at least 3 ways in which religious beliefs and attitudes are horrid. First, because a person can have no good reason of evidence or argument for holding a religious belief, a person cannot hold a religious belief except on faith. That is, in violation of his or her standards of belief worthiness. Religion is horrid then because it depends on and encourages self-deception, wishful believing, and contempt for evidence. Second, religion involves, perhaps necessarily involves, self-abasement. In worshiping something, a person assumes an attitude of inferiority to the object of worship, not just inferiority of talents, but inferiority of worth, inferiority as a person. Third, religion involves the attitude that all is for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds. This must be the best of all possible worlds, as it is God's handiwork. Thus, everything happens for a reason, not just a cause. Everything happens for a good reason, including suffering and sorrow, and is ultimately justified by that reason. But to take this attitude, again, an attitude one can take only against one's evidence, to take this attitude is to be contemptuous of actual suffering and sorrow. Now, one might defend religious belief on the grounds that it answers a deep human need for meaning and purpose. But people can certainly find meaning and purpose outside religion. What religion tries to answer is a need for transcendent meaning and purpose. That need isn't deep, though, for it has been instilled in those who feel it by religion itself. Religion then is the cause of the disease that religion seeks to cure. Because religion is horrid, we should be doing all we can to promote atheism and secularism. Sorry, I meant secularity. Now, we must, of course, act well and fairly in promoting atheism and secularity. That is, we must not violate or advocate violating anyone's civil liberties. Among the civil liberties we must respect are freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of dress, freedom of assembly, and equal access to state and other social resources. And so we come to that perennial topic of the Christmas season, the public celebration of religion in a multicultural society. Religious people and religious groups should not be prevented from celebrating or observing their religion publicly. Public resources available to other people or groups should be available to them as well. If veterans or gays may parade down the street, so too Christians or Muslims must be permitted to parade down the streets. Of course, religious people should neither expect nor receive from us deference to their ways. That something is a religious something gives it no more claim on us or on social resources than anything else has. Moreover, we should be free with our criticism of whatever it is religious groups are up to. Our criticism might occasionally be harsh and mocking, but religious people must accept that fact, or else seek to violate our civil liberties. Private individuals and groups should be free publicly to celebrate and promote, to propagandize for their religion to their heart's content. Secular institutions, on the other hand, should not, of their own initiative, celebrate religion. Municipal governments, for one, should not themselves be sponsoring religions. Now, one of my chief concerns as a Canadian academic is the strange deference to religion one still finds at many universities. University administrators everywhere seem to think well of religion and to want to subsidize it. Some universities, for instance, offer prayer rooms for Muslim students, when they wouldn't offer similar digs for card playing or movie watching clubs. Just about every university accepts student excuses of religious need, though they don't accept student excuses of, say, sporting or romantic need. Universities also always accept excuses of medical need, but religion isn't, at least it isn't in this context, like an illness. Sadly, St. Mary's University, my own university, is a university marked by a very high level of deference to religion and religious attitudes. Such deference even seems part of its overseas recruitment strategy. Two quick examples of deference to religion here at St. Mary's. One, we at St. Mary's have to endure a prayer of invocation at commencement. Two, each Christmas we erect on our own initiative, not following the request of a student group, a nativity scene on the front lawn of our main building. While secular institutions should grant space and resources to religious groups who ask for them, so long as the institution is equally good to every other group, they should not themselves sponsor religion. Now, this is especially true of universities, for religion is contrary to the ethos and the mission of a university. A university is a place of intellectuals and other dispassionate inquirers. We are not, as academics, people of faith. To the contrary, we value reason and autonomy of mind. As a community of people who value reason and autonomy, we cannot but be disdainful of faith. For us to celebrate a religion is for us to deny to ourselves our own best values. Now, it shouldn't sound paradoxical for me to say that we at St. Mary's and people at other universities both ought not to celebrate religion and should indeed have university-sponsored Christmas celebrations. It shouldn't sound paradoxical, for Christmas is not a religious holiday. Or better, there are two Christmases, one that only Christians celebrate and another that everyone, including Christians, can cherish. Christ was taken out of Christmas years ago, and what a wonderful holiday his removal created. A holiday of goodwill and cheer, of generosity, of children. These are fine things to celebrate and to promote. Unfortunately, misguided partisans of multiculturalism failed to note that Christmas had evolved into a secular holiday for all. Now they're trying to take Christmas away from us. They want only the celebration of Christian myth to remain. That's too bad. Because as a society, especially a multicultural one, we need common days of celebration. We shouldn't be condemned to a balkanized holiday season with various religious groups going about their different observances and nothing happening that belongs to all of us. Secular Christmas is a great idea, one that our age needs. Why not, then, a nativity scene on the university's lawn? Because the nativity scene is pure mythology, no elements of which are agreeable to reason. Thank you.
So I have already started sketching down my own questions to explore the disagreement. I can see that some of you are doing the same. But we will have a round two of 4 or 5 minutes apiece to respond to the opening statements made by others. I'm open to volunteers as to who would like to go first. Otherwise, I'll pick someone.
Stay in the same order. We'll just roll through.
If we're fine with that, then sure, we can stick with the same order.
I'm going to leave the tough stuff for this side anyways. Well, very quickly, I am going to leave the religious question to Dr. Eisener here. If you want to defend Christianity, well, you can go right ahead. But I would pick up on the last point that was made down here, is this whole thing of mythology. I don't care whether it's mythology or not. And you talked about being a dispassionate observer. Well, there is very little room within organized religion for dispassionate observers. I'm sorry. It calls for passion. It calls for being willing to suffer with the world and to love with the world as deeply as you possibly can. And I got to say, having heard what I've heard, that I would find a Christmas without Christ to be basically, I'll use the words, I find it banal and boring. It would have no mystery. It would have no mystique. It would have no majesty. And just on a concluding point on that, if we don't worship a higher power, we worship ourselves. I don't think personally, that's not an inviting prospect. And I don't find that. I was intrigued by Rabbi Ellis's remarks about the possibility of that interfaith dialogue, where we could actually see some of those holidays you were talking about. Because I think one of the problems we have in the church is we don't celebrate enough. There's a lot of grief and sorrow out there. And people in ministry like Dr. Eisener and Rabbi Ellis, they live that every day. So that's what I love about Christmas. You get this moment of unfettered joy. And really, why take that away from us? And I feel that it is being taken away from us. I turn it over to you, Wendell.
What's unfettered joy? We'll sign him up for Purim or something.
I'm game.
You want joy?
Pass it around.
Yeah, pass it around. Pass the bottle. Couple of points. Mark, I'm glad we're good friends. As usual, I find your premises reprehensible, but your conclusions are so admirable, I have no idea what to say to you. Couple of points. In some ways, this business of religious folks believe that everything happens for a reason is the grossest kind of caricature, at least of Christian belief. It is a fair approximation of Hindu or Buddhist karma, but it's certainly not even in the wildest nightmares of Calvinistic double predestination, an article of Christian belief. I too have suffered through convocation and listened to this meaningless invocation prayer, to whom it may concern. We're happy to be here, and thanks for a great day. Which you're not the only one who really despises that at this table. The common day is a celebration. I agree. We need to have these. There's a danger of falling back to an old imperial Roman model, where the gods of state needed to be honored in due course in order to maintain societal cohesion. Of course, this is the problem that the Christians and the Jews before them got into because they could not bend the knee to the genius of Caesar. A lot of that does have to do with a point my good friend Rabbi Ellis made about basically religious formation. Those of us who are Christians, we're very fortunate in that simply growing up Canadian or American or British or Australian or fill in the blank basically meant you probably grow up being exposed to some sort of rudimentary Christian religion. And that endured throughout the entire Constantinian era, which is now dead, gone, and long since buried. Now, lest you think this is simply a Christian problem, I suspect that trying to be, I speak out of turn, I expect trying to be a Jewish in a hostile environment, singing the Lord's song in a strange land, must also be an interesting exercise. And I also have, in my teaching here, have had the opportunity to speak to one of the Hindu priests in town who said trying to bring up people in the Hindu tradition apart from a Hindu society is incredibly difficult. So the whole question of religious formation also enters into this. There's one last little word here. A number of years ago, I was asked to give a guest talk in a philosophy of religion class. And they brought me and sat me down, strapped me to the chair. And now, Father Eisener, we've brought you in because you're the most sensible theist we know. I said, well, that's rather limiting, isn't it? And said, how do you prove the existence of God? Because otherwise you're an awfully nice fellow, but you seem to have this crazy belief. I said, next question, please. Although I am quite impressed that you think that I'm that much smarter than all the philosophers and theologians who've ever lived who haven't been able to give a satisfactory answer to that question either. The only thing in my life in which there is no doubt is my faith, as ironic as that may be. Rabbi?
The answer to that one example I put before you about the people in Oxford, my executive director, my organization, Mr. John Goldberg, whom some of you know, called the media and wanted to make a statement about their decision. And his conclusion was this: he said, "Now, understand very carefully, we're not trying to eliminate the holidays here. We wish all the good people in Oxford a Merry Christmas, but they must know that Nova Scotia is changing, and where people used to certain things for many, many years, there's many new immigrants coming here, there could be different religions coming here, and it's not just going to have blueberry pickers up there, whatever you have to work in the factories and the processing plants up there in Oxford, many other places, and so Nova Scotia is going to be changing. There's people coming here who don't necessarily celebrate Christmas. I know about that. So you're going to have to find some way of having Christmas without having it rule over people, things. Yeah, you had some good things to say. You had some good things, and you'd had some good things too, and then you're going to say, well, you can't all be right. You're right too, you know. So, yeah, I find something with what everybody said here. About religion and evidence and things like this and reason, we'd have to get down and adjust our focuses to one another, like Dr. Mendelsohn does in his optometry thing. We put different lenses and get this. There's an awesome book written by neo-Kantian philosopher Hermann Cohen called Religion and the Sources of Reason. And it's an awesome book quoting Jewish sources and that, but it's very much within philosophical tools of his day for that. I don't think the book has been outdated myself personally, but look at that and see. About all things being for the best, and that we didn't need Bertrand Russell and Richard Dawkins and people like that to tell us about the things about tragedy in the world and the different world. And that book of Job, the Psalms have asked these questions for thousands of years. And so that's not, we're very much aware of those questions and ask them over and over again, are living witnesses to having to deal with those questions in our life with that. Yeah, so the winter time here also. It says in the Talmud that this time of year was a time when the origin of the winter holiday was done by Adam, according to the Talmud. Now, you take this or leave the story, but the story is good no matter what you think of it. If you say the Jewish world, the Jewish New Year was in, say, somewhere in September, October, the world was created then Adam said, oh, you know, I see the days are getting shorter here. Maybe it was the thing I did wrong during this time of year for that. And he was worrying. Everybody says, oh, the days are getting shorter. Maybe the world is maybe I've caused the world to go into turpitude again. But he comes to December 22nd. That day didn't get shorter. And demonstrates, oh, that's about as long as it was yesterday. 24th and 25th, he sees the days getting longer. He says, it was not what I did. Olam bin Hagah nohev. The world goes by its natural scientific course. I'm just translating the Talmudic saying. And so he says it wasn't that. And so Adam made a holiday out of that day, December 25th, because it was a day when he saw that it was not what he did that was there. The world has its own natural course that we can study by and learn by and find it that way. So maybe that's a holiday we need to go back to. So celebrate the time of the year coming back. The day is getting longer for that. But yeah. But that's where I would go with that. And I'm interested to see what other people have to say, their reactions to things.
Kevin, the nativity scene features angels, wise men who were called by a star, a virgin who just bore a child. Those are elements that make me think, well, it's not particularly moving or interesting. If it were a scene of family life and friends and whatever, wow, that's great. That's fine. Oh, and not only that, the child is divine and has a destiny. It's not the welcoming into the world of someone whose future is open. The story itself that doesn't touch me. You think it's beautiful. I think it's well, not beautiful. Yeah. But I think we can work on it. We can get rid of the angels and make the child a child, not God, and then we would have something. We would have something to look at and admire.
We could have those things, though. Paradise Lost of Milton's is full of all kinds of angiology and things, but it's a marvelous piece of work. It's a marvelous piece of literature.
Sure.
You think about life in this. And so
Sure.
that doesn't necessarily disqualify just because it uses
Absolutely. I happen to find that story unappealing aesthetically, but there are stories from religion that can touch me. Sure. Wendell, I don't see why we can't grab the name Christmas and use it and run with it. Institutions, things like that change. Queen Elizabeth II and Queen Elizabeth I, we both call queens, but certainly the first Elizabeth wouldn't recognize the current Elizabeth as the holder of the same office. Our Governor General now fills a role very much different from the role the Governor General filled even, 25, 30 years ago? Well, no, maybe. So give us the word question. Give us the word Christmas.
Concede that there's more than one operative Christmas. So, more than
But
happy to concede that.
I thought you were asking that we return the word and call it Saturnalia.
Well, if you want to do that too, that's good too. But there's more than one operative Christmas. You'll have to decide what to call it. Make it lowercase c. I don't care. But there is more than one operative Christmas.
Sure. I agree. There are two, but I don't see why we can't call this what I was calling secular Christmas. Christmas.
Well, then the church reserves, I suppose, the right to. We could revert back to its older name. I mean, Christmas is just the English name for it anyway. The church calendar is always called something different.
Okay.
I'd ask you, Mark, why you want it. If you don't believe it, Christ says Messiah. You don't want the Messiah, so well, forget it then.
Sure.
Tell us why you want it.
I think that in a multicultural society, it's fine that we each have our own creeds, but it's also, I prefer a liberal multiculturalism to a communitarian multiculturalism. So I want there to be some common things. I think Canada Day and Christmas are excellent candidates for these common celebrations. Christmas be a celebration of goodwill, fellow feeling, and children. And I think these are wonderful things, and I don't see why we shouldn't all come together around traditions that have those three things. Maybe I've left a few of the other things that I like about Christmas out. Generosity. Come together around those things in celebrating something called Christmas. What I think is unfortunate is the idea that we have the holidays, or the holiday season. And that means this religious observance, and this religious observance, and this religious observance, and they seem to fall around the same time. Well, that's fine, good, but let's have something for all of us as well. A non-religious, secular holiday that we might as well call Christmas, because that's what we do call it. And it's been around for, 40 years, 40, 50 years. And I think it's unfortunate that we're reverting back to the idea that there's a holiday season with these disparate celebrations.
Mark, I see what you're talking about, but I would want to go the other way. Instead of cutting things back and let's just let everybody participate, but participate more fully. Let's see what a real sukkah is. Let's see what Purim is about. Let's see what Passover is about, bringing people out of slavery in Egypt. All that. That's an awesome message. So let's see what that's really about, not just a phony notion of what it's about. I'm learning other religions too, but let's see what these other religions really have to say in their fullness in that, as the people kind of share them, learn to share them with the wider community in that. Let the public space be those sort of things without knocking anybody else's religion on their bowling pins down.
Sure. But then we have the celebrants and the observers. Yeah. The observers are welcome, but that's not a common holiday.
No, it is. It's a sharing of letting guests into see your house and things like that. That's what we should have.
And
like
that's
Canada,
fine.
Though.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
But we need more.
Yeah.
And not only that, we want our holidays not all of them at least, to be holy days.
Yeah.
And Christmas, I think, is a wonderful opportunity for us to enjoy each other and to enjoy goodwill, and we don't need religion.
I guess I'd close that, Mark. Based on what, though?
Based on what?
Based on what?
On our
Just because we want a day to be happy?
Yes, on the fact that we
find
like each
that
other,
really-
Kevin. On the fact that we like each other. What's wrong with that?
I'm not objecting to that, but I'm just objecting to the fact that you've got no basis for
Well,
it.
that's the basis. Fellow
Well, at least
feeling.
we're still at the point where we like each other, so maybe that's a good point for me to intervene. So we've had the chance to explore, I would say in a very general way, some of the very specific and deep topics we could get into under this general umbrella of religious celebrations and how they're recognized in secular spaces. To take it to the next level, I'd like to turn it over to you, the audience, and encourage you to find your way to a microphone or through online, find a question. I'm going to kick it off with a question that's been burning, so that's the privilege of being the moderator. I get to jump in line ahead of the actual microphone. But I've wanted to ask this since Rabbi Ellis mentioned Oxford. If all you knew about Christianity you gathered from reading Facebook posts from my aunts, you would conclude that happy holidays is the worst insult a Christian could possibly face. So it strikes me as interesting that you use that example in Oxford of expressly switching back from deciding to say Happy Holidays into saying Merry Christmas. I'm wondering what the rest of the panel thinks about a choice like that by certainly a public, ostensibly secular governmental body making that at least nominal switch in how it's going to recognize this holiday season.
Well, I favor it. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Depending on what
Yes.
Christmas means.
Well, I can figure it out easily enough. I'm going to the bank. Which bank? The Riverside. We work out that ambiguity.
Fair enough. Anyone else on the panel?
I don't think the people in Oxford were celebrating Mark's Christmas. No, I think they meant something quite different than what you understood by it. But.
Sadly.
Leave you conscious. Can't you?
No,
You go ahead. I got to catch up here a little bit.
Okay, thanks a lot. I always like the French expression, joyeux Noël, that joy sense. But I always think we get caught up in these almost artificial debates about whether it's a happy holiday or a Merry Christmas. It comes down to that question of what are we celebrating? And I think that's the key to it. I don't use Merry Christmas very much. I said, may it bring you joy. And that's all it means to me. It's a sacred thing. May it touch your soul. And I'll leave it to Wendell.
Yeah, the way I would look at it is public institutions are perhaps committed to a degree of inclusivity that religious institutions don't have to be. I can be unapologetically a Christian in the confines of a Christian community. I literally put my neck in the noose tonight, root around the collar, or root around, try to make a fashion statement, and realizing that as soon as I put the collar on, I lost half my credibility. As soon as I opened my mouth, I'd lose the other half. But if to wish a Merry Christmas or the blessings of the Christmas season is one matter, which perhaps is only appropriate within the confines of the community that celebrates Christmas proper. If I need, as an elected official, to address everyone in the community, Christian, Jew, Muslim, atheist, what have you, then I can't exclude. I wish you a happy holiday. I wish you a nice day. I'll do something. But if Merry Christmas, I don't know, I wish you a blessed Saturnalia. I don't know. But perhaps, yeah.
Wendell,
A drunken Saturnalia, but perhaps it's inappropriate for me to wish you a Merry Christmas.
Wendell, haven't the Christians themselves gotten snookered into this whole thing? Because I have been told by some of my Christian colleagues and reading the books on this, isn't something like Easter actually a much more important day for being a Christian than Christmas is, and how follow out the going toward Pentecost and things like that? Isn't that much more important? If you were really doing it right, you'd be celebrating that with blazing guns and songs and the shopping malls and that.
Epiphany is a bigger deal than Christmas liturgically.
Okay, so
Blessed Epiphany, everybody. Easter. Easter is the queen of seasons in the Christian tradition, and actually lasts 50 days. Christmas only gets 12. But then in terms of the ranking of the festivals of the church here, it's Easter followed by Pentecost, followed by Christmas, followed by Epiphany.
But the songs aren't nearly as good.
Yeah.
Some of them are.
Here comes Pentecost. Here comes Pentecost. I don't know. But there's also an in-house taxonomy to these festivals, as Rabbi Ellis indicates, as there's an in-house taxonomy to the Jewish festivals as well. Hanukkah is kind of it's not as important as Passover.
If you get to sing the 50 days of Pentecost, this could be good on the first day of Pentecost.
that's where we got there. Yeah.
No.
All right.
Not going there. No.
So with my apologies for skipping the queue, we'll go to the first person in line at the
My
microphone.
name is Irisha Cox, and I'm listening to all four. I happen to come from an atheistic background, and I came by Christianity only recently, and I now go to church and attend every Sunday. And I think personally, if you say Merry Christmas, you as a Christian are saying Merry Christmas. But I live with a husband who's a native. He doesn't believe in Christmas. He goes through his native spirituality. But because the Canadian Bill of Rights says you've got to acknowledge everybody and every religion, so he says Merry Christmas, even though he doesn't believe in Christmas. He doesn't believe in Christ. He goes directly to the Creator. So I'm in agreement with Rabbi Ellis. I think we should have an interfaith community. But I think also, if we say Merry Christmas, we're Christians. If we're Jewish,
Merry Christmas.
you
Hope
say
Wendell has a
Happy
Merry
Hanukkah.
Christmas. Yeah, but I wish people Merry Christmas. They're going to,
Well,
whatever it is
okay,
for them, they'll have it. and they'll be merry and that.
But all I'm saying is that
I may or may
we
not do
should
it
follow
myself.
what we believe in, not what everybody else believes in. So really, I think this whole discussion is moot. It's redundant. I come from a Christian background now. Merry Christmas. If I happen to be Jewish, then Happy Hanukkah or Passover or whatever it happens to be. My husband, he's native. He'll say Merry Christmas, but he's not Christian. That's just the way he is. But anyway, and if you're Hindu, whatever your religious belief is, and where you say, you don't believe in Christ, so you say whatever. What do they say, Rabbi?
Well, let me give another example of things here. I was involved a number of years ago when the Swiss Air crash happened out at Peggy's Cove.
Oh, yes, okay.
And there was a ceremony afterwards. I was involved in that ceremony.
Okay.
And maybe you know something about this also. Everybody else was there. I think Noel was involved in the celebration. Everyone was there. Everybody else could get up and say whatever they wanted to in the name of whoever, Mohammed or Mother Earth, whatever it was, except the Christian. And she, was a woman who was chosen, could not get up and use the word Jesus or things like that. She was specifically told that because the government was organizing the thing on that. So I didn't use Moses. I could have, I guess. I was not told not to, but I never used that. I always find generic prayers that are talked about all religions. And we have a lot of those. I always pick that. But what do you do with things? I think when there has been something, though, when your people have been lowered over the years by the dominant tradition you've been put in schools,
That's
like
right,
it's your
yeah.
will, things like this. I think that tradition has to do a little bit of mea culpa and kind of back off a little bit from things like that. So till we get a little bit better understanding of things.
One of the things I like to do, and one of the things many academics like to do, is engage in discussion and argument. And that is, we say, well, here's what I believe, and then we criticize it. This, by the way, is the method of science. I'm happy for it to be a general method. I remember in high school, there were the two groups of people. Those who thought there were two groups of people and those who didn't. No, there were those who liked to talk about music, and they'd talk about music and they'd explain their tastes, and they'd criticize each other's tastes. And there were those who thought that this was in the worst of taste, because it's all just music, they'd say. And I think I can sort of see what those other people are like. They think that somehow argument is disruptive, but I don't at all. I think that, as a matter of fact, I think that the best way to respect a person is to take his views seriously, and the only way to take them seriously is to test them for truth, is to ask what the evidence is, and to discuss this with him. And so that's why I don't mind calling it nitpicking, but this is why I don't mind the activity. We do have some differences, and I think it's interesting to criticize each other's views and the reasons that we offer in favor of each other's views.
I'd like to ask a question that's come in from one of our listeners online. So it's directed to Rabbi Ellis. Do you feel that you cannot put out Hanukkah lights without strangers feeling that you're celebrating Christmas? I think what this question is really getting to is what do we do with the fact that Christmas seems to have eaten the other seasonal holidays alive? Any recognition of any holiday this time of year sort of by default becomes Christianized just because of the dominance of Christmas over the season.
What are we supposed to do? Just shrug off and say all this stuff? It's what it is. I'm not going to go out and fight Christmas and tell people not to do that. We'll just mind our own business and celebrate Hanukkah in our own way. We'll celebrate all the other holidays at their time. That hopefully we let the wider world, again with the press corps, the media, the radio people, should come around and cover some of the other holidays, let the public know a little bit more about these and get a little bit better, do a few of things, and then not have Hanukkah swallowed up by the Christmas season just because it happens to be near or around it every year.
Great. Any other comments on that topic? Okay, so there's a long question that I have to review first, so it's a good time to go back to the microphone.
Thank you. I just wanted to get maybe some comments from the panel on what I think is probably worse than sort of the religiousization of Christmas, and that's something recent that I would say is the worship of Mammon at this time of the year, and how the holiday season or whatever it is. Personally, I'm a live and let live guy, so like whatever anybody wants to do. But what I find deploring is how big business and the retail sector have taken over this entire thing. And, I heard somebody in the barber shop the other day, and she was talking about, the money that she's going to spend, the debt that she's going to get into. And it starts now, as you said, the Shoppers Drug Mart playing Christmas music. And most of the retail people know that if you play that music and appeal to, our sensitivity and our feeling of sentiment, our childhood, we'll spend more money. And so, just what this has done to society and the debt that we get at this time of the year, the consumption, when you look at, I was saying to my wife, the chocolates that are sold now that are never eaten any other time of the year. And then everybody goes to Weight Watchers, myself included, after Christmas to lose the weight. And the whole sort of concept, that's just taken everything away from us as to what this whole meaning can be. And in terms of the university putting a nativity scene out, here we are today in the Sobeys School of Business. Well, what if I like to shop at Loblaws? If universities are places for thought, well, why does this have to be named after Sobeys? You know, what happened when I went to this university 40 years ago, they weren't dependent on capitalists to give them money in order to be able to build buildings. You know, so anyway, that's, I think, you know, almost as big a problem as we have than the Christian celebration of Christmas.
I think one of the point, I think you made a very good point there. That whole commercialism thing, it has a deep spiritual issue to it too, and a very societal issue. What about the people who can't binge? What happens to them? And nothing happens. They are left out, and they suddenly, I think your Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens points it out, he said, want is felt most keenly. And it is, and the church struggles with this, because our own people are doing exactly what you talked about, running up debt, joining consumer masses. We're as susceptible as anybody to it, but we see the poorest element of this country getting poorer, and we said, what do we do? What about this disparity? And that's why I come back to this scene, because I said that says what we could be, and we need to be reminded of that every time we pull out that card.
I agree with you on both points you made about the. I don't see you anymore.
It's disappeared into the shadows.
Oh, I see. Yes, but right behind the light. Sorry. I agree with you both points about the commercialization of Christmas and also the worries about the university. The trouble is that universities cannot fund themselves. They need funds from elsewhere. We can all be worried about the deforming effects of money from business and industry on universities, but I worry also about the deforming effects of money from government. Whoever is paying the piper calls the tune, and governments used to have a more relaxed attitude. Here's the money, you're the people who know what a university is about, use it wisely. Now the governments are directing their money to specific things at universities, so that's a worry too. You're right to be concerned about the money from business and industry, but we should be concerned about the strings that governments are now attaching to money for universities as well.
I think, Wendell, you had a point as well?
Yeah. Another one of the hats I wear is as a musician. And I end up being responsible for the production of a fair bit of Christmas music, which I usually end up starting to write at the beginning of July. So by, let's see, today is the 6th. I have one more week to go before I am the very embodiment of resentment. I might be a university professor, after a fashion. But I tell you, I've also got 2 children, a son who turns 16 this spring, and a daughter who's 14 going on about 32. And when you speak of the commercialization of Christmas, it doesn't end up being very much under the tree before you have not much in the pocket either. As I said, my opening remarks, when we focus on the giving and receiving of gifts, that is, I suppose we did inherit that from the old Saturnalia traditions. We kind of baptized that at some point and said it had something to do with the gifts that the Magi brought to the Christ child, on Epiphany, mind you, not at Christmas. But I'm with you every step of the way when I hear you questioning the crass commercialization of the holiday and the ensuing financial distress it causes for so many families.
I think we need our good satirist Tom Lehrer at this time. I think he's going to go down in history. He's going to be read for centuries onward. He's going to be somebody in the age of Voltaire or Shakespeare. They're going to quote his lines over and over again because they are so marvelous. They're so devastating. But look at, remember Tom Lehrer about Christmas? Hark the Herald Tribune sings, advertising wondrous things. He has read his whole lines about that there. It's just devastating. But yeah, your point's quite well taken. We need to, but again, you don't have to buy into that stuff. You can set priorities there. You can explain to your kids that, hey, this is not a big thing here. Delve into the holiday and its depths. It's what this whole story's about, and Get more out of it than the flim-flam of the commercialism, and that you should be able to do that yourself. It's your challenge, our challenge.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go now just to a question that came in from online again, and then we'll go back to the microphone. So this year, the NSLC is not allowed to put up a Christmas tree. Meanwhile, in City Council, a prayer is invoked at the beginning of each meeting, and a Christmas tree stands proudly in Grand Parade. Instead of resorting to should and should not, tell us, what does this say about our local society and the separation of religion and governance? It's a great question. I don't know who wants to tackle it first.
It's profoundly confused. How's that for an answer?
Yeah.
And profoundly inconsistent.
Yeah.
There's a very short, succinct answer to a very profound question, to which I intend to add nothing.
Well, I've got nothing against Christmas trees. I think they could be understood as non-religious parts of a non-religious celebration. So I'm sad that there's no Christmas tree at wherever it is. I forget now.
Liquor Commission.
Is that right?
Oh, at the NSLC.
You're right,
Yeah.
the Liquor Commission, right. On the other hand, there should absolutely not be anything like a prayer at a public meeting. Why not? Because it's not. It's to defer to religion. So suppose I want at the beginning of the meeting to display my juggling talents, and people say, "No, we got business to do here, Mark." Well, it's the same thing. This is someone. The prayer is bringing in something that's not part of the scene. I understand. I don't know that this is true. It used to be true. Maybe it's still true. That there's that our board of governors begins. St. Mary's board of governors begins with a prayer. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I mean, that's just silly. Especially at a university. This harkens back to something that Kevin said about no room for dispassion in religion. Well, the thing about a university is that we're passionate, and one of the things we're passionate about is dispassion. We're passionately dispassionate. We're passionate about inquiry, and the way to inquire is dispassionately. Now, to have a prayer as part of our function as academics is to rank something that is faith above dispassionate inquiry. And this is why there shouldn't be a prayer at the Board of Governors meetings, and the out-of-placeness, I think, is, and the deference to religion is why there shouldn't be prayers at civil places.
Strangely enough, I would agree, but for a totally different reason. I don't think they mean it. I think they're just going through the motions. And I think I'd agree that kind of public prayer could only be offered if you offer the opportunity to every faith to be there.
Well, that means then that our Board of
You'd be
Governors...
totally unmanageable. You couldn't do it.
Our Board of Governors are hypocrites? Well, I don't
Rabbi
like to
Ellis
hear,
might show up,
I don't like to hear that either, but that...
We had a controversy a number of years ago. I was told to keep quiet about this because it was whether you should say the Lord's Prayer in the Nova Scotia legislature. And I was told at that time that this was a political issue, not a religious issue, and I was not to speak about it. If I was told that nowadays, I would ignore the people, go right to the press anyway, but I just started my job, didn't want to lose it then. I don't care if I lose it now, I can get by, I guess. But believe it or not, I am in favor, I don't know what happened. Do they still say the Lord's Prayer in the Nova Scotia legislature? I am in favor of that tradition. I don't think it should be changed. I don't think we should have every Tom, Dick, and Harry getting up there and saying all the prayers, because there could be all kinds of, it'd be Weird Friday and get all kinds of strange things happening, prayers and that.
Pastafarians. Yeah.
Whatever you have. The Lord's Prayer, it happens to be in the Christian Bible. If you didn't know that, you would find, if you just saw that prayer in the blue, you wouldn't know where it was. It actually is very similar to the Jewish prayer, the Kaddish. Even a secular person
would see in the world would we want the Lord's Prayer said? I mean,
because
and then we roll our eyes at how silly this is.
Everybody takes what they want from that. I believe a secular. You got yourself off the hook because I was going to put you on it. You almost said secularism.
I say secular.
You said secularity, but you started to say secularism. A Freudian slip.
Kevin did.
Okay, well, but if we want to talk about religion and abuse and things like this, hey, secularism as a religion has been the most awful thing that's happened in the world. People have absolutely no values and go off into put people in gulags and gas chambers, all kinds of things like this. There's a whole story for that. So, okay, people can take what they want from that. Deliver us from evil. Oh gosh, we want to do that. We should take that more seriously.
Who delivers you from evil? There's no.
It says it's for the people that are supposed to do that. It's not contrary to what you said at the beginning. Also, we don't abase human beings in Judaism. Human beings are a partner and co-creators in the world. We'll say, take that and don't do that. Go along the right thing. Make this a better world. Do things. Invent things. Make new medicines. Go to universities. Get better ideas. Improve things. Get the straightened world up the right now. That's part of our work to do things like that. So it's okay to do that. Take what you want from it.
Okay.
Again,
well,
it's not just a
that's
one thing. It should be a whole series of things we should be better educated about, not just one thing.
That has certainly opened up a number of possible avenues for discussion, but I'm going to go back to our person at the mic for another question.
Thank you. I'm going to fall asleep there. We're not the previous questioner, I think, hit the nail on the head when what he was really talking about was religions being enculturated into the culture, and I think that's a problem for Christianity. It's a problem for Judaism. It's a problem for atheism. Whether you're a person of faith or not, the person we're supposed to be celebrating around Christmas time is a historical person, or was a historical person. And if we believe what has been said of him, he had one mission in mind, and that was to bring about a new kingdom. And that new kingdom, as far as I understand it, had 4 elements: love, peace, justice, and nonviolence. Now, I wish I had an hour to talk about all 4 of them, but I just want to talk just 1 minute, the last one, nonviolence. Okay? And it seems to me that this should be the essence of all religion. Nonviolence should be there almost at the top. Okay?
But you don't need a religious justification for nonviolence.
Just a second now, let me finish. And while I was sitting down here, I just wrote down some figures on the top of my head. This is just for Canada, okay? Right now, we're spending $22 billion on warships, $65 billion on fighter jets, $20 billion we threw away in Afghanistan, $750 million on used submarines, which still haven't worked, $20 billion on prisons, new prisons, when the crime rate's actually decreasing. Just this past summer, we spent $30 million commemorating the War of 1812. Now, and all of these expenditures, these billions and billions and billions of dollars, I haven't heard a word in opposition from any religious group in this country. This is what I mean when we say that religion, the problem with religion is becoming enculturated. Now, again, whether you're a believer or not, the first 3 centuries of Christianity, they took that nonviolence thing very seriously. They were prepared to die rather than take up the gun. And of course, with Constantine and all that, it's been, the church, the Christian church especially, has become co-opted. Okay, atheism, if you look at the 20th century, doesn't have a very good record when it comes to violence as well. When we can talk about Stalin and Pol Pot and Hitler, and atheism doesn't have a very good track record. So we're all culpable. And it seems to me at this time of year, when we're supposed to be, those of us who still believe, celebrating the Prince of Peace, it seems it's time for us to renew, not just in words, but in actions, what all this, what is the implications of
I'd like
this
to ask
kind of
the
peace.
panel for their comments in response to that. Thank you.
Well, I like the four things that the Prince of Peace wanted to establish, but you say he wanted to establish a kingdom, not a democracy. I think that's unfortunate. Help to build a democracy with those four items, yes. A kingdom, no.
Other comments?
You make a very good point about the big C church as far as the issue of peace and nonviolence. I know within the United Church it has been troubling to many of us, this whole sense of the escalating conflicts and the failure of the church to really act as we think they should. But many of the individuals are preaching that. Many of us are preaching the whole idea of humanitarian aid. For every military vessel we build, we ought to build one that can provide humanitarian aid to the world. For every soldier we send out there, we should send a doctor and a teacher. But the only way we'll find peace in the world now, it's a hard sell. Churches are big institutions. I don't know about the other two religious leaders here. But when you're as small as I am in the church, it's kind of hard to have your voice heard too. But we're trying. I think the flesh is weak, okay? The spirit's willing. Maybe if the other gentleman would like to speak to that.
Not quite sure even where to begin with that. A reign of justice and peace. Basically, you're talking about the world of the Beatitudes, where those who mourn are comforted, and the meek inherit the earth, and all the rest. G.K. Chesterton famously once said that the real problem with Christianity isn't that we've worn it out, we really haven't tried it yet. In terms of the relationship between church and state and the institutional church's place in criticizing the state in which it resides, you will find a number of differences of opinion within the Christian denominations regarding that. I happen to come from a tradition that, at least in its North American context, has always been a very small player on the national scene. Not so the case perhaps in Germany, where our roots are. We could criticize, but who's going to listen? And when you see the demise of institutional Christianity, which is what we're looking at, you're going to see a lot more changing of hearts than changing of politicians' minds. There's something radically incoherent about working for world peace when most of us have lives and homes that are in utter disorder as well. I suppose it's a bit ironic to refer to perhaps the most famous Hindu of the 20th century, but Gandhi famously said, "Be the change you want to see." Of course, his action was on the political front, but everything he did had religious motivation. It's interesting, if you a bit of a mathematician, I mean, once upon a time I used to know how to use a calculator. If you had 100 persons committed to the virtues of the kingdom of God, what you were describing, who convinced 100 other persons in 1 year, and that process continued, in a generation and a half, you would have converted the earth. We're into the Christian dispensation 2,000 years. What the hell have we been doing?
You shouldn't want a kingdom to begin with. And you used the word reign. Did you mean that literally?
Quite literally.
Yeah. So there's an authoritarianism here in your politics.
It's not politics, Mark, it's theology.
Okay, in theology. It's still authoritarianism, and I'm in favor of peace through democracy and not through overlord.
You do realize that the root of the word democracy is demos, which means mob.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And I'm dedicated to helping the mob become educated.
Strangely enough, so am I.
Can I just finish one point, though? And you picked up something I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
In Hebrew, the word for peace is shalom. For the word shalom, it doesn't mean an absence of war or quietude or something like that. It means that things are whole and put together. There's a diversity in things that lead toward one another in some kind of sense of a kingdom, but not an autocratic kingdom. That's an idolatrous conception of God or society to have that sort of thing. But a kingdom where the parts come together, the various peoples of the world work together, some kind of overarching goal for the view of the whole world. That's a nice kind of kingdom to have, good thing to work towards, and that we need to have that. Peace. Gandhi. There is an exchange of letters, you can probably find this online, between the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber and Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi thought, now Gandhi's, I don't want to, throw something in the punch bowl here, but Gandhi is a big hero and everything, but Mahatma Gandhi is not a big hero in the Jewish community, because Mahatma Gandhi, in his exchange of letters with Martin Buber, said that, well, you Jews in Germany should just resist peacefully and do peaceful resistance there. And like we're doing in India, we're having a ways here for that. You can do that with a bunch of backward bureaucrats like the British were in India, where you're encountering a society like Nazi Germany, which is not just in the 30s. If you look at the history, was building up for centuries, especially the new racism in the last half of the 19th century in Germany and Austria. That was something beyond all bounds. You can't resist that peacefully. That had to be, there was a war eventually about to happen with that. It has to be there to prevent things like that from dominating things. It's tough, but that's what it is.
I'm sorry to say that we actually have been over time for a few minutes, but I'm going to take one more question, if that's all right. Sorry that you weren't up earlier on your feet, but remind you that we will be continuing this conversation more casually at the reception. So to our last questioner.
Thank you. This is a rather simple question. I know each of you have touched on it a little previously. Considering that we live in a multicultural society, do you think that this time of year, in each of your opinions, should be based more so on the reflection of our personal belief or faith, potentially maybe the accommodation of other faiths, or is there a space between, or neither?
Let us criticize faith and criticize it thoroughly. That's what I say.
I have every intention of celebrating the Feast of the Nativity of our Lord with my family, and I also will wish my good friend here a happy Hanukkah, as is appropriate to him. I wouldn't ask anybody in this room to violate their conscience to join me in my observances, but I would certainly allow room for everybody to hold their own.
I think it's an interesting word you use called reflection. And that's what I keep coming back to my little scene here. But that's what it calls us to do, is reflect on your place in creation. And I think every faith reflects on that. What is your place in God's world? And I invite the atheists to see where their place is in that world too, because this Christmas calls us.
Find it.
Well, good luck with that, because somebody already did that. That's it, Rabbi. Go ahead.
Yeah, we should just take the season a lot less seriously and just sort of mind our own day-to-day lives and things like that. And then, again, let's read where these stories came from. Let's see what it's all about. The story doesn't even appear in 2 of the Gospels. It only appears in Matthew and Luke and that. So why is it there? Let's ask questions about that. See where it all comes from. Maybe something's there for that. Let's learn about this and all the things, all the holidays, others' holidays. And we can participate in our own tradition, that we can be others as, interested spectators of that. I think that's what the model should be. Let's everybody whatever your holidays you're doing this time of year in the next few months, do it to your full extent, and we'll all try to learn from them.
Further to that point, I'd highly recommend this book, actually by Marcus Borg, called The First Christmas. I know Wendell's cringing over here, but
Or we will be assimilated.
yes, we will someday. But a lot of the historicity and the critical thinking you're talking about is contained in that volume. I find a lot of it questionable, but it's a very good book.
Well, so before we get into book club, then I'll,
You did that on purpose,
I'll
didn't you?
Yeah.
ask us to close. So thank you so much for your questions. No,
Would you
out of
offer
my
it?
hands,
I
not-
think
not
Mark
my
should
area.
offer it down there.
I have no closing prayer to offer, but I would like to offer your thanks and thanks of CCEPA to our panel. With a panel like this, as I expected, your questions may not have been ultimately resolved, but they were thoroughly explored with wit and savvy and insight, and we appreciate that. So I thank you, the four of you. On behalf of CCEPA, I just have a few reminders. First of all, our reception immediately following is a great place to continue this conversation or to ask the questions that you unfortunately didn't get a chance to ask. It will be on the 4th floor, and some of our CCEPA people, I'm sure, will point you in the right direction to make sure that you get there. I will also remind you, if you haven't already, to fill out your evaluations. That's very useful information for us in choosing our programming season. And lastly, on behalf of CCEPA, I want to wish you all a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, a happy Hanukkah, a passionately dispassionate secular Christmas, a fiery Pentecost, and most importantly of all, a drunken Saturnalia. Thank you all very much.